What the fuck is that? Show you for. So what's the top roller call you make here? Your shirt said no fish you got das Kapel. I saw Kania so here we make her Tobi Rachma. But talk on the Obrayro what he think her ways off behoven herself. So we must so there what he go here we pre-kapel not to Karim. Bios must now have a tiamis was there. Tamakito Sachra, Royekba, Ranera, Yadea Shilfa Bakisha, Vachapel Tamtu Pala. Copper possibly only Yadea Shilfa Lavion, no Sierra Vesa Michelle Kilho, Besa Lavishanim. Marvadi must have saw Shesh Vagamon Lusha, no the Bashir and Bava, the shifter of Zik Nearetz. So the Moses of Atim Korva Hagonos Nalaknani. Ozva Hoda Lusha, Batista Cleomacher. Pia Apostle Vechachma V'Soras Chesed Alishona. So Pia Vichos Beis of Lechem Matzos No Sochem. Kamuvanev Yashua Baro Ve'Yaharua. Rappos Bonus Also Choyo V'Ato Lisa Kumana. Sheker Achein the Hevel Ayofi Ishi Rasadona Hitisaro. Tumurami Priyodea V'Yaharua V'Yasher Masera. We are gathered here to give the final honor to Eva Hecht, Rivka Bas Yoshua. Eva passed away yesterday on the 7th day of Adar. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar that in terms of Yortzites, anniversary of deaths, perhaps the most notable one in the entire Jewish calendar is the 7th day of Adar. It was on the 7th day of Adar that Moses and Moshe Rabbeinu went up finally to Har Nevo, to Mount Nebo, for his final resting place. It is well known, people are very familiar with the Medrash, which tells us that when Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people, he peeled poor, he drew lots, and it fell out on the month of Adar. And he was very excited. He said, this must be an auspicious month to wipe out the Jewish people. Because it was an Adar that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses died. However, the Medrash tells us that he did not realize that Moses did not just die during Adar, but he was also born on the 7th day of Adar. It's very interesting because it would seem that the Medrash is backwards. Instead of saying he died and he was born, it should say that he was born on the 7th of Adar, because obviously that occurred chronologically first. And I'd like to suggest that it's not a mistake. Haman thought, just like there could be an end to a Moses, no matter how great a Jew might be, there is an end. He forgot that no, whenever you think there's an end, there is a rebirth. And there's nothing that better describes Eva Hecht's life than her ability to rebuild, have a rebirth after a time of such terrible destruction. When Eva was sitting Shiva for her sister not too long ago, I had an opportunity to talk to her at length about her time during the Holocaust. And I was amazed by the tremendous strength that she had to not only survive the Holocaust, but to make sure that her sister survived with her. And after living through that hell, one would think that that's the end. It's impossible to rebuild. But that is the story of Eva Hecht. We sit here looking at her children, looking at her grandchildren. Jeff and Mindy sitting here with Tristan and Jillian. Judy and Gilbert sitting with Daniel, David, Daniel, and Avital. She rebuilt. There was no death. There's only a rebirth. And that inner strength, that strength, that unbending personality is what got her through 94 years of independence. With that inner strength, the absolute unwillingness to lie down and quit is what we honor today. She was an amazing woman. She leaves a great legacy. I will miss her. Yes, Baruch. I'd like to call on her daughter, Mindy, who did so much for her, to say a few words.
Yesterday, Eva woke up with a long list of things to do. She was going to work because all 27-year-olds, which is all she'd admit to being, should teach themselves to trade stocks in their 80s and then spend better than a decade working full-time, 2 time zones ahead, using a technology that had not been invented when she was born. But that meant that when the New York Stock Exchange closed at 4 o'clock, it was only 2 here in Denver, and there was still plenty of time for other things. Yesterday's plan included 2 doctor's appointments, to which I was going to accompany her. It will come as no surprise that she planned to argue with both doctors. At the podiatrist, she was going to say that while the antibiotics worked to take away the pain in her foot, an infection was not the root cause, and her homemade remedy for callus removal was actually the helpful part. At her primary care physician, she intended to argue the usefulness and need of boosters in those with natural immunity to COVID. The next part of her plan was to come to our house for dinner, when she surely had an agenda of things I had not yet heard that needed to be discussed and argued. But alas, only some of the trading on her account was going to happen because, as we all know, man plans and God laughs. And today, we woke up in a world that is lesser than it was yesterday. There is less strength, there is less fight, and there is less moral certitude. I met Eva when Jeff took me home for Shabbat dinner. We had not been dating very long, and she and Emil had heard that Jeffrey had a girl, and they wanted to meet me. I walked up the steps with a great deal of trepidation. Both Emil and Eva came to the door, and she looked me over and said, "What are your languages, dear?" I mumbled something about English and looked pleadingly at Jeff to get me out of there. I did not realize that this inauspicious meeting would bring the most rewarding relationship that I can imagine. Judaism teaches us that our parents are our teachers, and I'm lucky to have learned from amazing people. Eva was a great teacher. She taught me to cook the foods she loved, mostly loved to make for others. She taught me to demand what I want and need, and to make sure that if others did not provide whatever I needed, they knew they disappointed me. She taught me that any idiot can make a mess. Only a smart person knows how to not make one. Any idiot can clean a mess, I'm sorry. And only a smart person knows how not to make one. She taught me that Hungarian has many sayings, like her favorite, old people should never have been born. She taught me that even the Yom Kippur Machzor has errors, and during the Vidui, it is perfectly acceptable to inform Hashem of all the things one has not done, as well as the transgressions one is willing to admit. She taught me that the offenses of others should be forgiven, but not forgotten. She taught me that coffee can only be drunk if it's hot enough to burn your mouth, even if it means reheating a single cup 100 times. She taught me that stuffed cabbage is for Simchat Torah, and you should keep peshku in the fridge because you never know when you need to drink champagne. But mostly, she taught me that horrors can be overcome and that one can come out on the other side and love deeply, work hard, and rise to every occasion. Eva's greatest pride was her children. She often said that no one could understand how precious Jeffrey and Judy are to someone who went through what she went through. All children are precious, but Jeff and Judy, the devotion she felt for you is on another level. Her greatest joy was her beloved husband, whom we all still miss deeply, and her grandchildren. I sat next to her at everything, at shul, at meals, at TV, at events. At her graduation from college, Jillian represented the Jewish people and taught a passage of Talmud to thousands assembled that steamy May Atlanta morning. Eva looked at me and said, "Can you imagine? Many times I stood in front of the crematorium. I could have died, and instead, Hitler killed himself, and we are sitting here at a Methodist university in a country where it's safe to proudly be Jewish, and my granddaughter is teaching Judaism to the people, and she is but one of my 5 amazing grandchildren. Jillian, Tristan, David, Daniel, Avital, know that your legacy and your heritage is to take all of Sakta's lessons and gift them to the world. She will live on because you will see to it that the world is brighter and better because you are in it. Because each of you carry a bit of your Sakta in you. It was my privilege and honor to have spent so much time with Eva. All of us are better to have known her, and the world is lesser without her in it."
I need his granddaughter Judy to say a few words.
My Sakta hated waiting in line. She always said it was against her religion. And she hated standing around with nothing to do too. But she loved to tell stories about her childhood, her family, her children and grandchildren, my Saba, their experiences in the Shoah, and as young survivors trying to build a new life for themselves in America. This was a blessing. As the next generation, we have so many stories of a life, difficult and real and rewarding, a life well lived to pass on. I'll share with you a short story of my own, short mostly because I know how much you would despise standing through it. I studied for a semester of college in Europe, and we planned to meet in France for Pesach. When it came time to book airfare, it was easiest to fly from Denver through Munich. Out of nowhere, it seemed, Safta said, "München? I'd like to go to Dachau." She was liberated from Dachau on April 29, 1945. Almost exactly 72 years later, on April 5th, 2017, we returned. I think she knew deep down that there's no such thing as closure, certainly not from an experience like that. But on the surface, she thought returning might bring a new level of clarity. When she arrived at Dachau in 1945, it was pouring rain, and she was wearing sackcloth in the back of an open wagon. When we arrived in 2017, it was sunny, and she was wearing powder blue leather and a green silk scarf. She was fresh from sipping champagne in the United Airlines first-class cabin. We toured the camp. She tried to work through some of her experience, and when all was said and done, there was no closure. Outside the gates of Dachau, there's an education center and a cafeteria. I walked with Safta, hand in hand, and we sat down to have some water. She told me she was hungry, and I handed her a banana, which, by the way, she hated bananas. She looked from the banana to me and back again, raised her eyebrows, shrugged, and then smirked. "Sure," she said. "I guess I'll eat a banana at Dachau." and she ate it triumphantly. Triumph was one of Safta's favorite words. She thought of her own life and of mine in that terminology. She was regal and formidable, kind and generous, and she was funny too. She had high expectations of us. She worked hard to provide us a life worth living, and in return, she expected us to live it well. There is no closure from loss or from tragedy, but there is solace in treating our very existence as triumph. We were all fortunate to know and love my Safta and to share in her triumph.
With the final speaker, we call on Eva's daughter, Judy.
Strength, dignity, honor, independence. These words defined my mother, Eva Carfunkel Hecht. This is her story. After she was liberated from Dachau, my mother and her sister Magda made their way back to their home in their hometown in the middle of Hungary, in a town called Nyíregyháza. And they wanted to find their house. But instead, in their house, they found Hungarians who had taken over the house. And the woman who came to the door made it very clear that she would just as soon kill them on the spot and let them enter the house, even to look for a photograph or a last memento of their childhood. So my mother and Aunt Magda went back on foot, headed for the American run displaced persons camp in Munich. As they crossed the border, they were caught by the Austrian border police, and along with several young men, were taken and put into a cell or a room that was behind bars. My mother was all of 16 years old. She was the same age as my boys are today. I will never again be behind bars, she said. And she went and looked through in every corner, and there was a window, and she saw that the bars that barred the window had a small hole. And she was so skinny, having been starved so many years, that she climbed through and she escaped. And there went there's three young men, and they found a way through as well. I will never be behind bars, she said. Never. The young men were freedom runners. Their job was to ferry people out of the now communist Russian zone and into the American zone, where they would hopefully find a chance to immigrate somewhere in the world to be free. So impressed were they with my mother that they engaged her on the spot to join them. And so my mother, a mere teenager, began a career of smuggling Jewish people who had survived the camps, among them families with newborn children, across several borders manned by border police to the relative freedom and dignity of the displaced persons camp in Germany. That is where she met my father, who was engaged in similar work. No matter what is thrown at her, we know. Until her last dying breath, my mother lived life on her own terms. When my parents were finally able to immigrate to this country, They were pushed onto a train bound for Louisville, Kentucky, only because the wealthy Jewish charity maven in charge needed to fill those seats. She meant well, but she threw them on the train. Louisville was a coal mining town. The air was filled with soot. My father found a good job working for a furniture manufacturer who really liked him. But having suffered black lung tuberculosis from digging the tunnels at Mauthausen, he soon caught pneumonia from the acrid air. My father was hospitalized. There, a prominent doctor diagnosed him with tuberculosis again. The doctor said he would have to remove my father's left lung. My father, who had spent exactly 1/2 of a year at Charles University in Prague Medical School, decided that the doctor was a charlatan and he just wanted to experiment on him since he and my mother were nobody, without family, without a support group, without friends. My mother agreed. My father steadfastly refused to consent to any procedure the doctor wanted to perform. So the doctor and the hospital pressured my mother, who was now all of maybe 24. The doctor kindly and patiently explained that the damaged lung had to go if my father was to live. My mother had no medical degree. She had no college degree. She had not even finished high school because Hitler had taken her to Auschwitz before she turned 15. So, but she said, Hitler did not manage to kill my husband, and neither will you, she told the doctor. She repeated it to the hospital. She repeated it to the chief of staff, and she repeated it to the Jewish Family Welfare Service of Louisville, Kentucky, which had been pressuring her as well. My mother held out, stubbornly insisting that my father be sent to National Jewish Asthmatic Hospital in Denver, Colorado, which they'd heard about, where they would treat tuberculosis, where they still treat tuberculosis to this day, and where they could find what my father's true diagnosis was, which my father was convinced was pneumonia, not TB, which he had also already had. And pneumonia could be cured. Well, in the face of my mother, the Jewish Family Welfare Service of Louisville, Kentucky relented, and they sent my father to Denver. But you, they told my mother, will stay here. You cannot go. Well, of course, my mother did not stay. And since the Jewish Family Welfare Service of Louisville, Kentucky refused to pay a dime, she went out and found herself a menial job and earned her own money for the train ride to accompany my father to Denver, Colorado. When they arrived, the Denver chapter of the Jewish Family Welfare Service took my dad to the hospital. But they left my mom standing all alone on the platform of the train station with nowhere to go. You will go back to Louisville, they told her. I don't know if she cried. I don't know if she was scared. I imagine so. But I know that she picked herself up and she moved forward. That night, Eva Carfunkel Hecht procured lodging on someone's covered back porch. And there she stayed, even finding work while she waited for my father to recover. When he did, from pneumonia, of course, the Jewish Family Welfare Service of Denver, Colorado, told them they had to go back to Louisville because you belong to Louisville, not to Denver. Mother said, we belong to no one. And she raised herself to her full height of 5'7.5". We will not sponsor you, they told my parents. My mother said, good, I wouldn't take a dime from you anyway. Stubbornness would be my mother's other defining word. So stubbornly, my parents stayed. My mother eventually found work as a bookkeeper for a shoe factory, but only after she decided it was no one's business what her religion was. So on the employment form under religion, which was required, she wrote none. When she left that job, only because I was to be born in 2 weeks, the virulent anti-Semite that was her boss was mortified and so upset. I guess I'm going to have to hire a guy. Said. Maybe two women. But when she left, in order to replace her, he was forced to hire 3 Jewish men. My parents quickly realized that in this country, financial independence was everything. So they script, they sacrificed, and they saved the 5 cents and later the 10 cents they would have had to spend to take the bus in order to invest it. My father started trading stocks, and with their pennies, they started to build first tiny apartments. My father had a theory: give a woman a nice big closet. And my mother told him a bathroom would be good. Then large, they started to build larger and then big ones. My mother's unique strength and single-mindedness, along with my father's extraordinary gifts and inexorable years of hard work by both of them, brought them to their eventual great success. My parents' emphasis was always on education and on building bridges between people. So when they were able, they endowed a chair at the University of Denver in Judaic Studies, and later they found a Holocaust Awareness Center. So at 72, my mother finally got to return to school. Having not just paid for her courses, but for the entire program, she decided first she would enroll in a class on Jewish ethics. There, my mother at 72 faced off the entire class of 20-somethings and the rabbi professor to proclaim that the Torah was simply wrong. To be a homosexual was certainly not a sin, as she explained the class. They didn't have the technology at the time to understand that it is all determined in the hypothalamus. So if God created the hypothalamus, homosexuality cannot be a sin. And they should have the same right to find love and a place in the world, the same as everyone else. My mother was a pioneer. Strength, dignity, honor, independence. Before the Jews were taken to ghettos, the Hungarian children were encouraged to ridicule and torture Jewish people. Once, a gang of thug boys threw snow and ice balls at my mother's back, taunting her. "You dirty Jew." My mother turned and she faced them. They saw her long blonde braids falling all the way to her waist and her beautiful, very Aryan face. "Oh, sorry, they said. My mother didn't flinch. She says, "I'm not dirty, but I am a Jew." In her 94 years, my mother saw the very worst of life. And she saw the very worst of humankind. But the worst never defined her. She lived life on her own terms. And so because of that, she also got to see the very best. Why? Because she created it for herself, for her family, for everyone around her. She had 2 kids, a wonderful, loving, dynamic marriage. She has 5 amazing incredible grandchildren, all of whom are carrying on the traditions that she and my father so cherished. She created community. She embodied generosity and lived according to her very own rules until the very end. At 94, she lived in the house that she and my father designed and built together, alone, no caretaker. She survived all her friends. She drove her very own car all by herself every single day. When I was here in December, I accompanied her to a doctor's appointment and I told her, I'll drive now. She says, no, I will drive you. And she did. Until her dying breath, she worked as a full-time day trader 5 days a week. When she died, she was going out either for the paper or the mail. And back to work. In spite of all the darkness that my mother saw, she not only found the light, she created the light on her own. I think the final words to define my mother would be an inspiration to us all, a life well lived. May she find my father, and may they rest in peace in eternity together. And may she live in our heart and our memories and the deeds and the light that we create for the future.
El Moy Rachamim, Shochein Bamramim, Amtzei Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Hashchina, V'Maros Kedoshim V'Torim, V'Zorik Yemasirin, Es Nishas Rivkas Baisi Yoshua Shalach Olamo, V'Avur Shanachim Mispar Baal Haskaras Nishmasa, V'Ganein Dei Menucha Sa, Ein Balachim Yasi Reb Seisar Knafov Olamim. Serve Nishmasa. Adonai Nachosa V'Tanu Achal B'Shalom Hashkava V'Nomar Amen.
Let it slide, let it slide, let it slide.
Because we're gonna heal it. Feel the breathing.
Never.
Bike cats.
Not the little one. Yes. But the other one.
right? They don't. One is over there. Look, that's not. The 19.
עצור תמים פרעה כי כל רחוב משפט אלמנה ואינו צדיק וישר הוא. עצור תמים בכל פועל מי יאמרו מה ספר השריף ומטוב ומעל ממיס מחיה מוריד שאול ויעל. עצור תמים בכל מעשה מי יאמר ירוב מה תעשה האומר ועושה חסד חינם בנו תעשה בזכות הנקראת כסר הקשיבה ועשה. צדיק בכל דרכיו עצור תמים ערך אפיים מורי רחמים אמרנו וחוץ מהערבו סובלים כי רחו אדון עשי חוץ מהרחמים צדיק עתו אדוני והמס רחיוס אשר יחד כגדול בכל רוחוס חברי רוחו זכרנו במחוס כאילו אנחנו רחמים אלינו כספוס כי רחו אדון רחמים והסליחוס אדוני משנות יהיה או איפה שנים יחיה מה ישרון לא כבוא היה ויהיה בורך דיין המס ממיס מחיי בורך הוא כמס דינו משוטט הכל ואינו משלם אדון חשבון ודינו הכל ושמו הדיו ייתנו יודענו אדוני כי צדק משפטך תצדק בדבריך תזכה בשפטך נעים יראך מידה שפטך צדיק אתה אדוני וישר משפטך דיין אמס שופט צדק ואמס בורך דיין האמס בכל משפטיו צדק ואמס נפש כל חי בידיך, צדק מאור ימינך בידיך, רחם הפריצה צאן ידיך, ותאמר ומלך חרב ידיך. גדול העצה רב האוויריה, אשר עינך בפוס על כל דרכי בני אדם, ועושה איש דרכיו תציר מערביו. להגיד כי אשר אדוני צורי ורב עושריו. אדוני נושא נא אדוני לקח, איש אדוני מבורך. והוא רחום יכפר בנו ולא ישקריס, ויבוא וישיר אפו ויעיר כל חמסה.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. נאמר דתו עתיד וחזקה וההיה מוחיים והתקף יחוד וחי ומיה ומדיניים קראת ירושלים וחללה וחללה בנור גבורה מדברה ואתה חלוחה דשמיא לערה וימלוך כדיפה בריסקו ומחוקי ותראה וחי הכל ומחול וחי הכל בישראל וחבלה מזמן תערים בנור Ela me pôs de faca de churrasco, de faca de tomato, da virada de alma bem ru. Amém. É isso, mama, mama, bem chamai. Papai, a lady, while told you Israel, they will. Amém. Say shalom to Roma. Tu canal como a say shalom to lady, while told the moon you have, they will. Amém. Two lines facing one another so the family can pass through. Want to make any announcement about Shiva and especially this over now?
We're going to have a mincha minion right now. Whoever can stay, help make the minion.